What's the number one mindset you must have to succeed in business? Most entrepreneurs think it's all about having a high tolerance for risk or being focused on their customer or having a positive outlook. And look, while all those things are important, I'm not going to argue that. The truth is, after helping hundreds of entrepreneurs, I've learned that none of them are the number one thing that's responsible for your success. In this episode, I'm about to show you what actually is the number one mindset you must have to be successful in your business, and 5 very specific ways you can integrate this mindset into everything you do in your business to dramatically increase your income and get more clients. And make sure you stick around to the end, where I'll share one very powerful question you can ask yourself right now to put this mindset into practice and virtually guarantee you'll be successful. Let's dive in. So Steve Jobs famously once said that business is a game of attrition. And I think in the game of business, no truer words have been spoken, because the honest truth is, when I look back over 18 plus years of building online businesses and what's been most responsible for my own success, it hasn't been that I've been the smartest person. There's so many other people out there who are smarter than me. It hasn't been that I've always had the best strategy. It's been that I have found a way to continue to show up and stay in the game. And that is the big secret behind the success of so many incredible entrepreneurs. When I look at all the people who are crushing it out there, it's really that they've engineered and created a way of continuing to show up so they can build for the long term. Because if you can just stay in your business longer than the other people in your space, the other people who are serving your niche, the people who are going to get discouraged whenever they hit a challenge and give up and go start another business or go back to a 9-to-5, if you can just find a way to keep showing up, you will be successful. Even if you don't have the best strategy, even if you make mistakes, even if you're not the smartest person in the room, because I'm not either. So this is the big secret to business. And when it comes to actually making this happen, the number one mindset you need to have in order to do this is you got to think long term. And this is the biggest thing that most entrepreneurs struggle with. The thing that is underneath so many of the failed businesses out there, the entrepreneurs who start things and then give up, or the folks who create success but then can't sustain it, it's the inability to shift into a long-term mindset. The honest truth is, most entrepreneurs are wired to think for the short term. And as human beings, that is where our focus is. But the ability to build a business successfully requires you to shift that mindset into a long-term thinking perspective. And that is the biggest mindset shift that is responsible for your success. That's the thing that's going to keep you in the game. If you can play the long game and you can really shift your thinking to focus on that long-term thinking, and we're going to talk about how to do that specifically in a minute here, you will be successful. That's the big secret. So we're going to talk about 5 different ways you can do this, 5 very specific things you can do in your business to shift this mindset. But, here's the thing, I'll say, as a business coach, I think that, I will be the first to raise my hand and say that I, at times, have been a part of this problem. Because, in the coaching industry, I think it's so easy to perpetuate this narrative that you're just going to start a business and then next month you're going to crush it. I talk about the stories of my clients who created results really quickly because they're attractive. People want to hear these stories. It makes it more likely that people actually want to buy. But the honest truth is, I got started really my first coaching business online back in 2016. Been building businesses online more than that or longer than that. But 2016, I really, went all in. My first year in business, I made $4,728. And that was an entire year's of work. And that was me showing up 6 days a week, building this business, making a ton of mistakes, trial and error. No one was paying attention to me in the beginning. I was terrible on video. My God, if you watch some of the early videos that I recorded on YouTube, it makes me cringe when I watch those videos because it took me hundreds of videos to actually get good on camera. And it just felt like I was slogging through that process every single day. Now, year 2, I think I made $75,000 or something around that. And I started to understand what really worked. In year 3, I hit 6 figures, but this was not overnight success. And so many entrepreneurs have this idea that success happens quickly, when in reality, it's that long-term thinking and that mindset, the ability to show up again and again and again. And over time, I've often talked about this when I work with my clients, business growth follows this exponential curve. So like at the beginning, if you think about like an exponential curve, it's like at the beginning, it looks like nothing's happening. And that is what it feels like when you're in the early days of growing a business. It's like, my God, I just feel like no one's paying attention to me. Should I even be doing this? You got a ton of mindset stuff standing in your way too, the self-doubt, the imposter syndrome, all those things. And if you can just find a way to continue to show up through that period, year 2, year 3, year 4, everything compounds because you plant all these seeds earlier on in the game and those seeds start to sprout. And then suddenly it's like, wow, I've got a really successful business, but it does not happen overnight. So I want to talk about 5 very specific ways that you can shift into more of this long-term mindset and perspective in your business. The first thing, this is such a big one. And this is something that, you're going to hear it and it's just going to sound cliche to you. It's like, yeah, of course. But it's the thing that honestly, if I would have known this earlier, it would have saved me so much stress. And that's to do what you enjoy. Here's the secret about growing a business. Most people don't like to talk about. Everybody's trying to focus on the right strategy, finding the perfect strategy for them. Is it social media? Is it ads? Is it YouTube? Is it blogging? Is it SEO? I mean, my God, so many different ways you can market yourself online, right? It can feel overwhelming. Everybody's trying to figure out the right strategy. But here's the thing, every strategy, they all work. They're all useful. And I've built businesses using all of those strategies, social media, YouTube, ads, and they've all worked for me. But here's the thing, when I look back at the thing that actually made any of those strategies successful, and when I mentor people, like the thing that actually makes the strategy work is not the strategy in and of itself. It's the fact that the people who are doing the strategy keep doing it. Because whenever you start doing a new strategy, you're going to suck. Whenever you start recording videos, you're going to suck at videos. If you start doing reels for the first time, your first 50 reels or 100 reels are probably going to suck. And over time, you get better and better at better. And then the strategy becomes an unfair advantage for you because you become really good at the thing. Like the only reason I'm good at YouTube now is because I've recorded hundreds of YouTube videos. And over time, I've learned what works and what doesn't on that platform. So I've gotten better and better and better. And now it's become a very effective strategy for me in my business. Same thing with paid traffic. I've spent years running ads and have just learned so much about what it takes to be successful with paid traffic. The big secret is it's not about finding the right strategy as much as it is finding a strategy that you enjoy so you can continue to show up and do that strategy on a daily basis. This is like the big mindset shift, I think, for a lot of people. And this is why I think it's so important to find the strategy that's right for you. I'm not a big fan of like cookie cutter business in a box type coaching programs. I've been through programs like this where it's like you go in and you kind of just get like one strategy and it's the same strategy that, maybe everybody else was given. And it's basically like all about fitting you into a box. And the problem is the box works for some people, but it doesn't work for other people. And so like when I work with clients one-to-one, every single client that I work with gets a customized business plan and business strategy. And what I'm always trying to do with my clients is figure out what's the strategy that they're going to enjoy. Not to say that every moment is going to be enjoyable. There's going to be moments you don't want to show up and do something, but you do it anyways. But like, can we find a strategy, a marketing strategy that leverages your strengths? If you really enjoy being on video, how do we double down on that? If you enjoy writing, how do we double down on that? If you enjoy speaking and like, how can we do more of that? Maybe in-person events. Can we engineer an environment where you're going to show up on a daily basis doing something, but you're actually going to have fun? Like, I love doing these episodes, recording videos, doing this podcast. It's just fun for me because I have the heart of a teacher. Like, that is my thing. I just love sharing. I love, teaching ideas and concepts. So I could do this all day. Like, that is the big secret. I'm not like, I don't feel like this is work right now, So that is the thing that, like, for me in my business, because I feel that way, I want to keep doing it and I want to keep showing up. So many people, I look at the way that they're marketing and it feels like it's such a grind to them. And they feel like they're forcing themselves every day to do it because it's not in alignment with them and their strengths. And if you're in that kind of a situation and relationship with your business, it's not the strategy that's the problem in and of itself. It's that maybe the strategy is not a good fit for you. So the shift there is, how do we find a strategy that actually is going to work for you, that you're going to enjoy? Because all the strategies are successful. The thing that makes them successful is that you enjoy them enough that you're going to keep showing up. Hey friend, hope you're enjoying this episode of the podcast. And before we get back to it, if you're an established online business owner who's serious about unlocking your next level of income and impact and growth in your business, I want you to watch my free $1 Million Online Business Training, where I walk through a 4-step roadmap I've personally used to sell well over $1 million of coaching, consulting, and courses online. It's going to make the journey of growing your business so much easier. I want to give this to you for free. All you got to do to access it is go to jasonmoss.com/growth. That's jasonmoss.com/GROWTH to get free access to this training right now. Now back to the episode. So that brings us to number 2, which is putting relationships first. Again, another thing you might hear and you're like, okay, that sounds cliche. Obviously, relationships matter. But here's the thing. Most people in online business do not put relationships first. They treat their audience, they treat their leads and prospects in a very transactional, surface level, what can I get from you way? And they burn out. They burn out their lead flow, they burn out their business as a result. So when I was a director of sales, basically, I was leading a sales team inside a large growing coaching business. And the whole model that we had was basically like we were running ads that was straight to like a webinar. It was like a pre-recorded webinar. And then right after that webinar, people would get on like a sales call. And it was a very like short-term funnel. It was like someone doesn't know you, they click on an ad, they watch a webinar, and now they're being invited to a sales call. And so we had this big team of salespeople that were speaking to these people all day and trying to convert them and close them. And that was my job, was to like manage and lead the sales team. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I learned a lot. But when I look back over that business, what I see is we were taking such a short-term mindset in the way that we were nurturing and building these relationships. Because when you click on an ad and then you go to a webinar, it's like you don't even know this company. And you clicked on an ad like an hour ago and suddenly you're getting on a sales call. It's like trying to sleep with someone on the first date. So we end up burning so many opportunities, people that might be great fits during maybe 1 month or 2 months or 3 months down the line, because we've got this very like short-term mindset around how we're marketing. And I see so many people doing this too. I've literally talked to multiple people this week. I have a client I just signed on board. One of the reasons he is working with me is because his funnel, the way his funnel was set up, was basically he was doing this exact thing. And he had spent like 40 grand on ads. And he was like, this is not working for me, Jason. I'm not signing clients. I need another system. And so, we're working together to build out a completely different model, much more of a relationship first model in terms of how he's marketing, which means you look at like what I teach today, like if you're watching this episode right now or this video, depending on where you're listening, you might have been following me for months. Maybe you clicked on an ad of mine, and rather than me pitching you like right off the bat, I maybe gave you like a free resource or a free guide, and now you're on my email list, and maybe you're getting my emails, and it might be like 3 or 6 months before we get on a sales call, and that's fine with me. And maybe you're just hanging out and you want to watch my free content, and that's good too. But the truth is, the way that I think about marketing is I really put the relationship first. And just like any relationship takes time to build. Doesn't happen overnight. You think about anyone significant in your life, your partner, your best friend. These are relationships that did not form overnight. It took lots of dates to get to the point where maybe you wanted to marry your partner, right? So why are we not marketing that way? Why are we expecting someone to just find us online and then to get on a sales call and close? So many people are taking this short-term focus in terms of how they're marketing, and it just doesn't work. Honestly, I think of a client I worked with a while back. Her name was Megan, incredible business coach. And when I first met her, she had made $2,500 over the previous 6 months. And her DM approach, she told me she'd done, I think, over 100 sales calls, and like no one was signing up. And one of the things we looked at was her messaging approach and how she was communicating with people. And she was, like a lot of the messages they were not super great. They were, kind of sleazy and like short term. And like we shifted the model in the way that she was marketing. And over the course of a year, she went from that place to making over $200,000 in her business. She retired her husband. And so much of what was underneath that was this shift in thinking and mindset away from this like short-term, very like transactional, sleazy type of like selling to how do we build and nurture community and relationships and market in a way that's much more heart-centered, much more in alignment with these relationship-first principles. Dramatically changed the game for her. So it really comes back to putting relationships first. And this means, you don't have someone coming into your audience and you're like, I'm going to close them on day one. It's like, how can I give? How can I warm that person up? How can I build a funnel that is in alignment with the way that relationships actually work? Super important. That brings us to number 3. It's a big one too. And honestly, out of all the things on this list, I still struggle with this one. It's something that I'm learning and continue to relearn. It's like, this is like one of my lifelong lessons, which is to prioritize sustainability over hustle. So my first coaching business back in 2016, I was working 6 days a week. I was working every Saturday. I only took Sundays off. And my mindset was, well, I can grow my business faster if I work more. So common, right? Like so many people say this. And after a couple of years, I burned out and I ended up shutting that business down. And, there were many reasons for that. But I think one of the big reasons was I did not honor my body and my own needs as a human being in that business. And things have shifted for me and changed for me. And as a business coach today, the way that I run my business now is very different. And I'm much more focused on how do I show up for the long term and how do I create an environment that allows me to do that instead of just treating this as like, how do I create these like short-term sprints and constantly feel like I'm like sprinting to the next finish line, which so many entrepreneurs do. And look, in the short term, if you look at it in like a very narrow focus, it's like, well, you can get more done if you work harder, but there's diminishing returns to that, right? And if like my focus is how do I show up for the next 10 years? Because I know I'm going to be here like 10 years down the line. This business is not going away tomorrow. And so I want to create an environment where I can continue to do this work over the long term. So because my focus is so wide and how I'm seeing things, I take a lot more rest than I used to. And sometimes I wake up and it's maybe like a Wednesday and I don't like I'm tired, and I don't like yesterday is a good example. I just went out to a Warriors game with my dad. He was visiting here in Colorado and he took me and Kimberly out to a game. So we were out there, I think it was yesterday, was it 2 days ago? And, we had a good time. And then I woke up the next day and I was tired. I was tired because I'd been out until like 12 o'clock, going to this game. And so I laid in bed like in the morning and I didn't get up and I wasn't like, oh, I need to get back to the grind. I was like, I allowed myself to rest and I had a light day. Now, a lot of like productivity business gurus will tell you, you need to like force yourself to show up and work. And in the short term, that makes sense. But if I don't honor my body and I don't take care of myself, I'm not going to have a business 5 years down the line. I'm going to have health issues. I'm going to have all sorts of challenges. So this is something that I'm practicing. And I used to be much more regimented and much more rigid with the way that I was operating. But I found that didn't work for me in the long term. And when I zoom out and I start to look at how do I create sustainability becomes the value over hustle, leads to very different decisions. And in the long term, you actually end up being more successful. This is like the big secret. So everyone's like, oh, if I take time off or if I take time to rest, I'm not going to be as productive. I tell myself that story sometimes too. I still struggle with those thoughts. But what I've found is if I can take more time off in the short term, I'm going to be more successful in the long term because I'm going to be rested. I'm going to make better decisions. I'm going to be able to show up for the next 10 years instead of being like 3 or 4 years in and burning out like I did in my first business. So prioritizing sustainability over hustle, I think, is really important. And it's not easy to do in a culture where, our value is equated with our productivity. Like if you live here in America and in pretty much every country around the world, like how do we measure the success of a country? We measure it through GDP. In other words, how much did that country produce? So is it any wonder that we feel this sense of like pressure when we're not constantly working? If you have literally the way that you measure how successful a country is by how much they produce, how could that not trickle down to each of us as individuals. So it's a radical act to rest. It's a radical act to take time off. And we have to fight like lifetimes of conditioning in order to do that. It is not easy to do. And I struggle with this probably as much as anyone else. So I'm sharing this message for you, and I'm also sharing it for me, really shifting that focus from hustle to sustainability, super important for your success. So that brings us to number 4, which is to zoom out when you make decisions. So many things in business look like wins when you look at them in a narrow mindset, but actually end up being losses when you look at them through a wider lens. For example, if I'm just like, how do I make as much money as possible this month? I could be like, let me just go harder on sales, emails, I do another promotion. And in the short term, at least in terms of like my P&L this month, I could double my revenue. I could do that. Like, I know how to do that. Why am I not doing that right now? Because that same thing is the thing that in the short term will create success, but in the long term can actually have negative consequences. Like if I sell too much without nurturing and building value and building relationships and adding value to people, if that balance is off, in the short term, I'm going to make more money, but in the long term, I'm going to burn my audience out. People are going to unsubscribe. They're going to be like, screw this guy. Like, why should I stick around when every single email I get from this person is just a sales pitch? So there's a balance between give and take. And I think it's really important to remember that in business. I have so many of the problems that I think we experience in our world right now. We look at things like global warming. I'm like, this is really like, it's a problem caused by short-term thinking. We're not focused on like the next 50 years or 100 years. We're focused on how do we increase profits today? And we're doing serious damage to our world because of that mindset. So this is not just something that, happens in your business. This happens in societies and countries and worlds at large. But if we were to just zoom out and say, well, how do we create an environment that's going to be is going to allow people to thrive like 100 years, 500 years down the line, we wouldn't be making the decisions we're making today. And so many business owners fall victim to this same kind of mindset issue. We're so focused on the month. It's like, how do I make the month successful? If you're like, I can always tell when I talk to entrepreneurs, like where they're at in terms of like short-term, long-term thinking. Cause it's like the people who are like, I want this month to be better than the last month. And, the next month to be better than this month. It's like, that's not how business works. Business is not like a straight line up. Like, for example, and my business right now, we just made a major pivot like 4 or 5 months ago. Completely like basically shifted our business from focusing on working with new coaches to established online business owners. And I know it's going to take 6 to 12 months to build up our audience in that new space. So you look at our revenue, at least in the short term, and it's taken a dip. And if I was looking at that and I was like, oh my God, like this month needs to be better than last month in terms of revenue. If I was just like every month needs to go up like a straight line, I wouldn't be able to navigate this. But in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm building this business for the next 10 years. Where do I want to be in 10 years? And I'm willing to take losses in the short term so that I can create success in the long term. So much of what it takes in order to be successful in business is to do that. If you invest in things like paid traffic, when I help people with paid traffic, and honestly, like so many people have dramatically grown their businesses, myself included, through paid traffic. But I know when I first invested in ads and started with ads, I knew I was going to invest in paid traffic and those leads were not going to convert for maybe 3 months or 6 months. So I was pouring a lot of money into ads and I wasn't seeing a return right away. And if I would have looked at that and said, well, this month needs to be better than last month, but oh my God, I'm spending all this money on paid traffic. It's not converting, something's terribly wrong. I would have pulled the plug. But years later, paid traffic has taken me from making 10K a month to like 60K months. It dramatically changed the game in my business, but I had to zoom out and see things in a longer term perspective. So I think this is really important. I love this story of the Amish, and I don't know much about the Amish, but I heard this once, and I don't even know if it's true, but it's a nice story. Apparently, the Amish, when they are reflecting on whether or not to bring a new piece of technology into their culture, all of the elders will get together and they'll have like a meeting. And one of the questions they'll ask themselves in that meeting is, how will this piece of technology affect 7 generations down the line? And so they're not just looking at today, they're looking at the impact years and years and years into the future. And they use that thinking to make decisions as to whether or not they want to bring this new technology into their culture. Super powerful, right? Like, what if we did this as a society? What if you did this as a business owner? What if every decision you made, you looked at, okay, how is this going to affect me in the next month, as well as the next year, as well as the next 5 years? You can put on those lenses, and rather than just making that short-term decision, you can think about what the impact is and the consequences are of all those decisions over the long term. And honestly, that is how you create success in a business. Because the secret is, most of the things that actually create long-term sustainable success in business are not the things that are going to pay off in the short term. You start creating content right now, you're not going to get clients right away. But that content is going to build and nurture relationships. And those people, maybe 6 months, 12 months, 2 years down the line. I just had a sales conversation with a guy who's been following me for 3 years. Been on my list for like 3 years. And now he just reached out and we just had a sales conversation. Like, that is what starts to happen when you take that mindset, you zoom out, you're like, okay, I'm here for the long term. I'm focused on value, showing up every day, building these relationships, not like, how do I convert as quickly as possible on the front end. So zooming out with every decision you make, incredibly powerful. And that brings us to the last of these 5 points, which, so far, I think we've talked about like the surface of like making long-term decisions, and all of that's important. But when I look at the entrepreneurs that I work with and mentor, and I look at what's underneath this struggle to shift into like a long-term mindset, and I look at it for myself too, and I know this for myself, the thing that gets in the way is fear. And the thing that shifts us into short-term thinking is fear. When you get afraid, when you're like, I don't know if my needs are going to be met, or I'm afraid that I'm not going to have enough money for this month, or I'm afraid that if I don't sign X clients this month, I'm not going to be able to pay the overhead, or all this like fear-based thinking, what starts to happen is your mind will shift into, okay, like, how do we figure out how to get money as quickly as possible? And so the thing that actually is underneath short-term thinking is fear. And this is why people struggle to shift into long-term thinking. Because in order to think in the long term, you have to be grounded in a nervous system state of safety. And you have to feel like you're going to be taken care of. Now, I recognize that, I just want to acknowledge that for many people, this is a very difficult thing. I'm very privileged as someone who has always grown up. I've always, had enough. I've been in a family where, we never had to worry about whether or not there was going to be food on the table. So that is not my reality. And I'm not really speaking to the people who that is their reality. That's a completely different situation because, it is hard to shift into long-term thinking when you're in a place where you're literally like month to month, or you're worried that you're not going to be able to put food on the table. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the folks who, have enough in the bank. They've got enough to cover their short-term needs, but they're struggling with this piece around fear, which is very normal in terms of running a business, especially in navigating the ups and downs. It's like, how do you ground into safety in your own internal self, in your own nervous system, so that you can make decisions from a place of that long-term perspective, because your nervous system is not all fired up and trying to keep you safe. Because if that's where you are, it's very difficult to shift your focus. So this is where practices like meditation, I think, are really helpful. Somatic work, I'm a big fan of. Hypnotherapy can be incredibly helpful. These are often modalities that I'll recommend my clients integrate. There are many tools out there that can help in terms of like regulating your nervous system. But oftentimes this is the thing that's like underneath all of this that we really need to address. If you're self-aware enough, you know that, okay, I can feel that maybe I'm like in fight or flight, or I've got like nervous system dysregulation, then really tending to this piece first, having practices that you can integrate into your day-to-day to be able to work with your nervous system, to be able to create more internal safety, independent of what might be going on the outside. That's going to be the thing that's going to allow you to shift into that long-term perspective. Because once you feel safe, you can do that. And it's so much easier to actually make that happen. So a lot of different tools here, a lot of different ways that you might integrate long-term thinking in your business. I want to leave you with a very powerful question that I think, when we talk about shifting into long-term thinking, this question has really helped me do that. And it's actually a question I have. You could see behind me, if you're watching YouTube, you could see maybe my computer monitor. I actually have this question like pasted onto my computer monitor because I ask myself this question all the time. And it's so incredibly useful because it helps me zoom out and shift out of fear and into a longer term perspective, which helps me make better decisions in my business. So what is this question? This question is, if I had $10 million in the bank right now, what would I do? When we talk about like the shift into long-term thinking, if you can create a state within you where you can tap into that abundance, like all needs met energy, which is what this question helps you do. It's like, hey, and replace $10 million with whatever the number is for you. For some people, that's not enough. For some people, maybe the number is less. But whatever that number is, that when you hear it, you're just like, I'm set. I'm good. I don't have to worry. You ask yourself that question. If I had $10 million in the bank, what would I do? You can ask this in a very like micro way. Like, what am I going to do today? Well, if I had $10 million in the bank, what would I do? Or I probably wouldn't like scramble around trying to like, do some new promotion that I don't need to run because I'm worried about making overhead this month. Maybe I'd create some content that would build relationships with my audience. The big secret is you ask this question long enough, you actually create the scenario that it reflects. We talk about this so often in my mentorship clients. It's like acting as if, or be, do, have is another way of saying this. Is like, in order to create something on the outside, you first have to become it on the inside. So the big secret is if you want to make $10 million, you want to have $10 million in the bank, you start by asking yourself this question, like, how would I show up if I had $10 million in the bank? You start making decisions from that place and you look back, you're like, wow, I just created $10 million in the bank. So to me, this question helps me shift out of fear. It helps me shift from short-term thinking to long-term thinking. And it helps really give me a new lens to evaluate making decisions in my business. And this is a very powerful question that can help you shift into longer-term thinking in the day-to-day. So very powerful question. You can use this with content like, you're about to write an email. If I had $10 million in the bank, how would I write this email? What would I say in this email? It will help you just cut away all the neediness and just, show up in a much more grounded, more abundant perspective. If I had $10 million in the bank, what would be the right business strategy here? If I had $10 million in the bank, how would I navigate this sales call? Very helpful to shift into longer-term thinking. Long-term thinking, the foundation of your business success, the number one mindset you need to have to be successful. I hope you found this helpful today. We got so much more good stuff coming on this channel, on this podcast, depending on where you're listening. So I will see you in the next episode. I hope you have an awesome rest of your week. Take care.